What do people mean when they talk about transmission, or even more specifically about direct transmission, as it relates to Qigong or Kung Fu, or possibly even to aspects of Chinese medicine, or maybe even to other arts and practices as well? That is going to be the topic of this episode of Qi Life. Alright, so I've found myself a reasonably quiet spot in a big park in central Paris. It's very nice. There's some formal gardens sort of over that way, but I've come around here where it's a bit quieter. There are people walking around, coming back and forth, and so you might hear some sounds in the background as we go through this vlog, but hopefully it won't be anything too distracting. Okay, so to our topic, transmission, or possibly even direct transmission. Excuse me. What are people talking about? If you practice Qigong or Kung Fu, or again even Chinese medicine or some other related practices, it's likely that you'll come across these terms at some point. Either people talking about them, or when people are writing about things, and they'll talk about their background, their experience, and maybe where they've learnt what they've learnt and what they practice and what they teach. When people use these terms, they can be referring to a variety of different things, all related, of course. So in this vlog, I'm going to talk about 4 different things that people might be referring to when they talk about transmission. And I'll give a brief overview of those first, and then I'll go through again and talk about what I think of each of those 4 things, and using the term transmission to describe them. And then I'm going to talk about a 5th type of transmission. You could think of it as a type of transmission, and why I think that's really valuable, and that's what we should really be aiming for and paying attention to ultimately in the end. All right, so 4 different things that people might be referring to when they're talking about transmission. So transmission is about transmitting knowledge, skill, basically knowledge and skill, ability, maybe. So the first one of those would be someone writing a book or an article, or possibly even making a video. That's one way of transmission, of transmitting their knowledge. And so many things have been transmitted to us, from people who are alive, and certainly from past generations, through writing, and nowadays through videos and things like that. Even in terms of artifacts and sculptures and paintings, these are a form of transmission. Very straightforward. Another thing that people may refer to as transmission, so this would be number 2, would be, and this is where they might start to say direct transmission, would be learning directly off someone, spending time physically with them, and that could be in the context of just classes, or it could be more extensive, someone who goes through some type of internship or apprenticeship and spends time very close to someone, learning more from them in that way. A third type of transmission, and again this would be where people would often start to say direct transmission, is where maybe someone has taught publicly, and so there's been a certain amount that people have been able to learn, but then they've also kept some secrets. Chinese practices are classic, well known for keeping secrets, and then they might teach these to only a few select people, and this, some people might then consider to be direct transmission as opposed to regular transmission, because they've learnt the secrets. This is also connected to ideas about lineage and ideas about being an indoor student versus, an outdoor student or a regular student. The idea being, if you're accepted as an indoor student, you get the inner private teachings rather than just the public teachings where people are kept outside the door. So that's number 3. The 4th one gets a little bit more mystical or esoteric, possibly, depending how you look at it. And this is where there's an idea of transmission through not direct teaching, as in someone talking to you, demonstrating, correcting your posture or things like that, but where there's some kind of energy transmission that opens you up to knowledge or ability in that way. All right, those are the 4. What do I think of them all? Well, ranging from the practical to the more esoteric, there is something to all of them. Yeah, I'll talk through them one by one, because while there is something to all of them, I think sometimes people do make too big of a deal of some parts of some of them. I mean, that's common with lots of different things, and it applies to this concept of transmission particularly as well. So the first one, just practical teaching through books, through videos, through things like that. This is really valuable. And this is one of the key ways that we can have an accurate passing of knowledge across generations. Because there's this natural pattern or process, even not just across generations, maybe even across long distances, because there's this natural pattern, this natural process that as people take on some knowledge, a practice, whatever it is, and then they do it for themselves, they change it. They shape it to suit their own needs. And a lot of this goes on unconsciously. Sometimes it's conscious. They consciously make changes and adjustments. Other times they're aware that maybe they've forgotten parts of it, so there's a conscious awareness that things have changed. And other times, and very often, this is unconscious, where they do change how they're doing a practice, some of the details of it, but they're not aware that, someone might think that they're doing it exactly the way they're taught it. They don't realize it's changed. And this, yeah. And then, and then if they then teach someone else, and then that changes it further and so on. So, what gets passed down changes from person to person to person, and these changes can occur over a relatively short space of time. So having things like written materials, something to refer back to, something that stays the same, is really useful for going, okay, well, what was taught? And this is a classic thing in terms of like legal cases and things like that, where it's like, okay, even if you have a phone call with someone about something, and you're like, you want to have some way to determine in the future that, things were accurate, well, writing it down straight after the phone call, even in a court of law, that will be taken as far more accurate than someone just saying, oh, I remember having a phone call some time ago and this is what I think I remember, because our memory changes. So having something written, something, objective in a way, is really useful. And certainly if those books contain, photos and were written by the person themselves. When we get into videos as well, so this is obviously a relatively modern innovation. This gives way more detail, way richer ways of transmitting knowledge. There are a lot of people in the past who, used to think that, you couldn't possibly, the only way you could possibly learn a practice like Qigong, for example, was directly from a teacher and so on. But this attitude, I think, really largely came from the age of when the only other way of really transmitting things was in writing, or maybe in writing in pictures. And if you've tried to learn some practices from just writing and maybe pictures in some older books or even more modern books, you'll recognize that, there's a certain amount that you can learn from this, and you might be able to get a fairly good idea of a practice, but there's always going to be little details maybe that you miss and that aren't so clear. And look, even just learning from a book, that can be valuable. You can maybe learn enough for your purposes, but there will be things that are missed. When you now, in this modern age, also bring in video, there's this possibility of showing and for people being able to pick up so much more in terms of details and the nuance of movements and practices, and it's a far richer way of teaching, and people can learn practices very well when you combine both written and video, and then on top of that, live interaction, even if it's online, where someone is, a teacher is observing what they're doing and able to make corrections and give them feedback. You can learn so much in this way. It's become a much more effective method of transmission than in the past. One of the classic cases in entertainment, but it's reflective of things how it used to be. There's a classic in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, the movie, where one of the young characters, she's been taught and mentored by an older character, and I can't remember the name of the characters. I think one's Jade Dragon and the other's I don't know. But there's the younger and the older one. And then the older one is really surprised when the younger one is able to beat her. This is, they were training in Kung Fu, and is able to beat her, to better her in fighting. And the younger one says, well, you were teaching, or you learned only from looking at the pictures in this old manuscript. Whereas the young one had learnt to read as well, so she could also read the characters, and so she learnt this level more than the older one, and therefore she had superior skill. Man, if you add videos in as well, and then live interactive feedback, wow, you're getting so much more than you could get from pictures or books in the past. So that aspect of transmission, sort of a primary one, really valuable because of the way it gives consistent reference points for knowledge, and again, addition of video makes it so much more effective in these day and age than it was previously. On to the second one, transmission, or I was holding my fingers like this, wasn't I? Transmission as in teaching in person. Now, while writing and videos is really valuable, is there something extra you can get from being taught in person, like live in the same space as someone physically at the same time? Yeah, of course there is. There is little nuances that even just with your eyes or your ears you might pick up more. You might be able to move at different angles to experience some things. You might be able to experience physical touch as part of that teaching as well. So all of that can be useful in gaining more details of understanding a practice or principles. And further than that, we all do naturally connect with each other through our energy. We can choose to disconnect to some extent as well. But it is a natural thing. We are social creatures as humans, and it's natural for our energy to connect. And there's an aspect of energy communication that can occur when we're in person in the same physical space with each other, which is not that it can't occur through something like online where you're at a physical distance, because we can connect in our energy that way as well. And I find frequently people who do the online courses through Long White Cloud Qigong, they comment on just how much more powerful they find the group practices often than just when they're practicing by themselves. And when they do those group practices, they're not in the same physical space. They've got their laptop or their phone or their tablet or whatever, or maybe they've even gone big and they've plugged something into their TV, so they can watch and join in with those live group practices. And everyone else in that group practice is quite some distance away, but they still find that the energy and the effect is more powerful. So we can have that connection and that interaction even at a distance, but certainly there's some more that comes through more easily when we're in the same physical space together. So yeah, is that a worthwhile thing to do? Even if you have learnt online, to take opportunities when they arise to practice in person with other people, and particularly with people who have a lot of experience in school. Yeah, of course, because there's little things that you can pick up, both in terms of physically what they're doing, but also aspects of their energy that you might pick up differently from being in person as well. And so, yeah, it's worth calling that direct transmission, perhaps, as opposed to some other kind of transmission. So the next one, the third one, I'm holding my fingers like this, the third one, where it's like, okay, this indoor versus external, outdoors students, where people have been accepted in to learn the secrets. Yeah, this is an interesting one, the whole secret keeping. In principle, it's not something I'm in favor of. I think if anything, well, it can act as a barrier to passing on these practices, this knowledge. And I think there's not the same motivations for this as there was in the past, where effectively there was a lot more, commercial sensitivity. It was like you needed your secrets for your competitive advantage, and I don't think that really applies so much in this day and age. It's more just like teach people as much as they're prepared to take in. Now that's relevant, and it's not so much about secrets, but about like levels of learning, and there are certainly some principles and aspects of practices that it's not a good idea for people to do until they have sufficient preparation, sufficient background, knowledge and experience. From a couple of reasons. One, it could just be confusing until they've got sufficient understanding of principles and experience. And two, some practices it can be too strong without a sufficient base as well, and that can cause problems and people won't get the benefit from it and could even do them harm. So there are reasons to not just teach everything just completely openly to everyone at all times. But I don't think teaching those practices that require preparation should necessarily be considered as secrets. It's more just, well, I'm not going to teach you until you're ready. It's not the same as a secret. It's just like, I'm doing it for your own good. That's a different take on it. Also, in terms of these secrets, in my experience, I mean, there can be some interesting things that people keep as a secret and then pass on at some point. I do know also that often when it comes to, okay, what are the secrets, that it can be really disappointing. I have heard of people, both of these are examples are specifically in the context of Kung Fu, people teaching Kung Fu, but energy application relating to Qigong, Chinese medicine, and fighting using energy within Kung Fu. And I've heard stories, from some people of where, they were kept training, kept committed, all this thing, being told that, at the right stage they would be taught the secrets of the style, and they'd just kept them going because there was this thing in the distance that they were going to learn the secrets, and they just needed to show themselves to be more dedicated for longer. And eventually, when they were shown the secrets, it was some very standard acupuncture charts that they could have just looked up in a book. But these were the secrets that they held out for so long. Now, is there anything wrong with Kung Fu students learning standard acupuncture charts? No, of course not. It's really valuable knowledge. But for it to be as like a big secret, okay, it's a bit disingenuous. And in fact, this is maybe crossing over into a different subject. The person teaching those secrets may well have thought that they were secrets because it's so, well, again, in the past, I think this is changing. In the past, it was so common for some people to be really blinkered and only know what they knew and not look at anything else. It was like, no, I can't, I have to stay loyal. Not realize this is common knowledge, but they thought it was a secret. Yeah, anyway, I might talk more about that in another vlog, about not knowing what you don't know, and maybe what we can do about that, but that's a topic for another day. Another case that, not so much a story where I heard it sort of third hand or second hand from someone else, but one that I heard much more directly from a very senior Kung Fu teacher who had taught a lot, actually, to be fair, over his lifetime, a lot of really interesting Kung Fu and practices and principles, but had, again, as was common, held some things back. And then this Kung Fu teacher decided at a certain point that a select group of his senior students that he was going to pass on the, if not secret, sort of the advanced knowledge that he had held back until that point. And anyway, I wasn't present for the teaching. I could have attended, but I just wasn't available at the time. But instead I heard about it afterwards, and I heard it directly from the teacher, and he said, oh yeah, I taught them this, and I taught them that, and I taught them this. And it was all, principles of how to use energy within combat, Kung Fu. And after he had told me what he taught, I was like, okay, well, I'm sure that'll be useful to them, but why didn't you also teach them this and this and this? Sort of some more nuanced approaches that would have been even more effective. And he was like, huh. I can't remember exactly what his answer was. But it was either something along the lines of, well, I couldn't be bothered, or I don't think they'd be able to understand that. And this is another thing that relates to, this keeping back of secrets, because often someone will keep back those secrets until, I don't know, the last moment. And classically, just before they were going to die, they would pass on the secrets, or, until they're not really wanting to teach anymore and like, okay, finally I'll pass on my secrets. But the reality of learning some more nuanced, sophisticated applications of knowledge and principles is it may and often will take time to grasp and understand them fully, and then be able to, understand them to the degree that you can apply them. And I would argue that until you can apply them, you probably don't fully understand them, because there's something about transmitting knowledge, same word, but carrying knowledge through from theory to application, where it's like, there might be a fair bit that you have missed in your theory that are required to bring it to application. So unless you can apply it, I would argue you don't really understand it. And so if you keep that knowledge as too much of a secret, it's like, okay, you pass on that secret, but then the secret's lost anyway. Because it's like, in theory, I understand the secret, but really what someone may have needed was years of exposure to this and developing little by little so that they could truly grasp it and apply it. So yeah, that secrets thing, that's a bit of a weird one. Anyway, it can be valid. Sometimes there are secrets to be passed on, but I don't think that's a healthy approach, and often the secrets aren't so secret anyway. All right, the fourth one. This is where it gets quite a bit more esoteric, possibly, and this is the idea of transmission, where, if you take a religious view of it, you could compare this to someone like giving you a blessing of some sort, and that blessing, is then carried by you. We can be much more practical about it than that, in terms of someone doing something with their energy to your energy, to essentially impart some knowledge that way, or possibly to open up or unblock your energy flow in some way, so that you're now able to do some things that you couldn't do previously. And so this is beyond just teaching you a technique or something, how to do something, but like, okay, using the energy to facilitate some process of change that opens up or enhances your abilities. Now, to some people that will sound really, really esoteric, and fair enough. It's not something we often consider in our day-to-day lives, but it's not that hopefully difficult of a process to understand. In many ways, it's a similar process in what we do in Qigong healing, for example, where someone will use a flow of energy, that they direct that flow of energy to work on the energy in someone else, to unblock energy, to balance it, and so on, so that the person can become healthier. This is a little bit different in terms of working with the energy in a way to facilitate development of skill, but the principle isn't too different overall. So again, while it may sound esoteric, is there something to it? Yeah, there is. Just generally on all these, not so much the first one maybe, on the last three, where we get into the direct transmission versus someone just learning from what is maybe not too uncommonly available. I think people often get a bit caught up, too caught up on this idea of direct transmission. Now, is there something to it? Yes, there is. Can it be valuable? Yes, it can. But in a way, it can also distract you from what is really valuable, and even for some people, act as a barrier to further learning and development. And this is where I'll talk about the fifth type of transmission, which I think is the one that we should put as our highest ideal, the one we should really focus on. And that is, you could consider it a type of transmission directly from nature, directly from the world around you, and possibly, again, if you are of a religious way of thinking, maybe directly from God or from spirit or from, whatever your way of describing that is, where you go beyond okay, what am I learning from a particular person, to what is the true ultimate direct source that you can learn from. And again, even if your way of thinking of that is in terms of God or spirit or so on, I think maybe focusing on talking that about learning from nature is still really valuable, because even those with a religious way of thinking, in most religious traditions, nature is a creation of God, so therefore you're learning from the work of God. And so I'll primarily talk about this as learning directly from nature. When we do this, there's sort of no limit to our learning, to our experience. When we focus too much on this transmission, we're then capped at, well, whatever this person could, whether it be through teaching, whether it be through picking up subtle nuance from them, whether it be from them, working with their energy to transmit some knowledge or skill in that way to us, there's kind of a cap on what we can learn, and inevitably it's not going to be everything that they knew, because there's no way we can possibly transmit all of our experience to someone else. We might be able to transmit a lot, but there'll be things that are ours from our perspective that someone else can't pick up. And so if that's our focus, then over the years that level of knowledge and skill becomes less and less and less and less through imperfect transmission. On the other hand, if our focus is on learning directly from nature, we can certainly learn from all of these transmissions, whether they be books, videos, learning in person, learning some secrets, or sort of energy transmission. We can learn from all of these to help us on our way, but then we're not capped in how much we can learn, because we can then go beyond that to nature itself and learn directly. There's a classic old Bruce Lee scene from memory. It's in Enter the Dragon. It's like right at the start of the movie, and in it Bruce Lee is working with a young kung fu student, and there's the scene, and he uses his finger and he's like pointing at the sky, and then the student like looks at his finger, and Bruce Lee slaps the student in the head and says, "Don't look at the finger or you will miss all of the heavenly glory." So he was saying, it's, the teaching is like a finger pointing at the sky, but don't look at the finger. Look at nature itself. The finger is just there to point you in the right direction. And in my opinion, all of those different teachings, again, whether it be books, videos, in person, some secrets, some direct energy transmission from someone, they're all just to point you towards the ultimate source. You don't want to get stuck on that. You want to look towards that ultimate source. And that's what's really, really valuable in the end, is your own personal understanding from your connection to nature itself. Now, that's not to say that those pointing fingers aren't useful. They certainly are. They can help you to learn a lot more quickly, but it shouldn't be where your learning ends. I know for myself, having had some main teachers who influenced me a lot, but then also having had interaction with a variety of different teachers at different points over the years, and seen what they do and spent time with them, and sometimes even learnt some techniques directly from them. I can think of some of these where another practitioner or teacher has shown me a technique, and they've said that you do this and you do this and how to do it, and I've gone, okay, that's interesting, and I've tried it, and it's like, oh yeah, it works great. And then I've thought for myself, what, I bet you there's a simpler way to do this, and then from my own knowledge, what they taught me, their pointing finger helped me, right? It pointed me in the right direction. It was a good starting point, but then drawing on my own knowledge and experience with nature, with myself, my own body, my own energy, and with nature, I was able to develop that further and go, there's a simpler way. Try it out. Oh, that works too, and it's way easier, And so we don't want to be limited by this idea of transmission. And yeah, I think that's one of the main dangers with this, that it can be limiting. And also, I guess another danger is when people put too much emphasis on this in terms of describing their own history, their own background. Again, it can distract from Yeah, but what do they actually know? What skills do they actually have? How well can they teach and pass those on? There's a lot of, again, as you encounter different people, a lot of relying on, well, I got some transmission or some direct transmission from this person or that person, and therefore, I should be a great person to learn from or something like this. And sometimes that might be true. And often it's not. In my experience, people who rely too much on, like, I got taught by this person or that person or that person, it's like, yeah, but that's missing the point. Surely it's the actual content of what's taught that's most important. Nothing wrong with giving respect and acknowledgement to the people that you learnt from, but relying on that as some kind of qualification, yeah, again, I think often that can be a way to distract from the true value of what's taught and so on. Anyway, hopefully that's been an interesting vlog for some of you. At the very least, it might clarify what some people are talking about when they talk about transmission or direct transmission. Maybe also some food for thought as you think about your own learning, and the role that these different types of transmission might play within your own learning. Those pointing fingers, they can be really useful, and I do love those quotes from Bruce Lee. In fact, so much so that some of you probably know that it's been quite a while at this point because I've been traveling for quite a while, but I was doing some DJing for ecstatic dances and also for some other events as well. Now, I didn't do this in any of the ecstatic dances, but for some of the other events, I played at some festivals and things like that over the last couple of years. In some of my sets, I'd play some samples, and that was actually one of the quotes that I sampled, and I'd be playing it, while I'm playing this music, and I'd have samples of Bruce Lee going, "Don't look at the finger, or you will miss all of the heavenly glory." I think it's a great quote to remind us, about what's really important. So hopefully that'll be a good reminder for you as well. All right, if you've enjoyed the vlog, please like, comment, subscribe, share, all those good things. And I look forward to seeing you on another one soon.